Aloha. Aloha. My name is Serge Kahili King, and welcome to our Huna talk at Cooper Center. This evening we're going to have as our topic the secret of forgiveness. And as we usually do, I'm going to begin with a legend. Okay? And the legend also has a name. We can call this one the Brothers of Hina. So, Ikawa Kahiko, Mamua o Kapenekuke. A long time ago, before Captain Cook. That's how we know it's a very long time ago. Why, there lived here on Big Island, Hina, goddess of the moon, as she's mostly known as. Why, she was living here on Big Island. She would also travel around a lot of places. She's probably the most famous goddess in all of the Pacific, one of the most ancient of goddesses in this entire oceanic region. But what's not well known is that Hina had a lot of daughters. And she would, from time to time, grant some of her powers to these daughters. And the story we're telling tonight is about two of these daughters who lived here on the east side of Big Island. One of them was Hina Keahi, which is Hina with the power of fire. And the other one was Hina Kunuua, which is Hina with the power of rain. And there were two hills at that time above Hilo. And both of these were actually cinder cones, places where the lava from Mauna Loa had started to come down toward the coast, and there were obstructions underneath, maybe hardened rock or something. And so instead of coming all the way down, why the lava erupted at those points and formed these cinder cones. And over a good long time, why they became kind of lush and very rich soil around both of these cones. So one of them, Halai, is the one that Hina the mother gave to Hina Keahi and all of her people as her place to live. And the other hill, which was called Huna, she gave to her other daughter, Hina Kunuua, for her and her people. And for a long time, they both did very well, and they were some distance apart, but they both prospered quite well. But then, everything changes in life. That's what life is all about. Life is about change. And a time came when there was a drought, and there was nothing that they could do to help it. The days became burning hot. There was no rain whatsoever. Hina Keahi tried her best to ease the heat, but she couldn't do anything. Hina Kunuua tried her best to make it rain, but she couldn't do anything, and it was getting hotter and hotter and worse and worse. And finally all the crops started to wither up and die. The taro first, of course, which was the staple of the people. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this, but in a lot of the Pacific, but especially Hawaii, the taro plant, which is a very starchy plant. It was like the Hawaiian equivalent, in one sense, of wheat, because it was like the staff of life, but in another sense, like potato, a lot of carbs, and this is what they actually people got most of their energy from. But anyway, those plants were withered. This was upland taro. And so then there were the bananas. The next most important crop was the sweet potato, and that was withering all and dying. And the fruit trees were all drying up on the trees, and all in all, it was a pretty bad time. So actually, as one of the sayings in the story goes, the shadow of death was upon the land. Well, finally something had to happen. Now, Hina Keahi was very much concerned with the well-being of her people. And so she made a decision. And she came and she announced to the people, she said, all right, this is what I want you to do. Here on the side of this hill, Halai, I want you to make a great big imu. Now, an imu is a Hawaiian word for an earth oven. But what that means in Hawaii is you dig a pit, and then in that pit, while you line the bottom of that pit with banana leaves and banana stalks, And then you line that with stones, special kinds of stones that will not burst under heat. And then on that you lay all the food. Then you put more banana stalks and leaves and mats, and you cover it up with dirt. Usually if you're doing a full pig in an oven like that, typically it's steam cooking is what it is. All of the banana stalks have a lot of water in it. So it's an indirect, it's the steam heat that's closed in because it's sealed that cooks the food. So they made a really big one. And so she sent some of her people to get the rest of the banana stalks and the leaves and bring them. She sent people up into the forests to get fuel for the fire, because you gotta have you gotta have something to burn to heat those stones, and you gotta get them red hot. And then before you put the top part on, and then she sent people down to the coast to gather the stones themselves that could be used for the cooking, because this was a big emu, so you had to have a lot of those. And then as the people were doing this, she announced, she said, all right, for the rest of you, make space for food. Where you would normally put the taro and the bananas, because they didn't eat any raw food in ancient times. When the taro and the bananas, and the sweet potatoes, and the chickens, and the pigs, and the dogs, they did eat dogs, okay? And she made space for that. And in this middle, she said, make a big space for a person. Oh, well, okay. They started going ahead and doing that, but on kind of heavy hearts, because it was going to require a sacrifice, and they were afraid that she was going to pick one of them. But they did as they were told. Finally, all the things were ready. The last part, with the last of the banana stalks and leaves, were not in the mats, of course, that wasn't on yet. And there were the spaces where the food really wasn't, but would be if there were food. And then Hina Keahi came up and she said, I will be the sacrifice. When I lay down in the center of this, because all heated and ready to go, she says, as soon as I lay down, cover me up with the bananas, cover me up with the mats and the dirt, and seal it all as quickly as you can. And she says, and wait 3 days. At the end of 3 days, you'll see a woman standing by the side of the emu, and do everything that she tells you to do. Okay, they did that. She laid down, and fast as possible, all the people put the bananas on, put the mats on, covered the whole thing up with dirt, made sure it was all sealed, and then they couldn't do anything else, so they just waited. 3 days. During that 3 days, however, things happened. First there were earthquakes. Then there was lightning. Then from out of the ground in different places around the hill, freshwater streams and springs popped up. At the end of 3 days, they went out there toward the end of the day, and there was a woman standing by the emu. They didn't know who she was. But when they came up, she said, uncover the emu and feast yourselves. Well, they were surprised, but they uncovered the emu, and there was all this cooked food in great abundance. And there was so much of it, there was enough to take care of them until the new crops came in from the springs and the streams that had started to flow. So they were really happy. Then their eyes were opened. It's like they weren't allowed to see it first, but their eyes were opened, and they saw that this woman standing there was actually their goddess returned to them. And so they were very happy. And so they partied like mad. Now, meanwhile, over on the other hill, Hina had heard about all this going on. And then when she heard about how successful her sister was, she really didn't care about her people. But she got really jealous that her sister was getting all that attention and getting all that praise. So she says, okay, I'm going to do the same thing. So she came up and she announced the same thing to her people. What she didn't quite realize at this point is that fire and water don't go very well together. But anyway, she did it. And she had the emu dug, and she had the fuel brought, and the stones brought, and the banana stalks brought, and the places laid out, and the place in the center. And she said, when I lay down, and she gave the same orders that her sister did, and she lay down, and people covered her up, and they waited. During that 3 days, nothing happened. First day, nothing happened. Second day, nothing happened. At the night of the second day, however, there was a terrible noise. When the people rushed out, the emu looked like it had been burst open. Everything was scattered everywhere. They saw no sign of their goddess. So they went back home, came up the next morning, and still no sign of their goddess. But way up on the side of the mountain, there was a very dark, almost black cloud hugging the mountainside. And it looked very strange to them because it looked like it was trembling, kind of trembling as if somebody were full of fear. But they never did see their goddess again. And they didn't know what to do. But Hina Keahi heard about their problem, invited them to join her people so they would all become one, and everybody lived happily ever after. Pipi holo ka'au. Thus runs the story. Now, we can find a couple things in there that are of interest to us in terms of our topic tonight. First, the idea of sacrifice, and then the idea of jealousy, which is a kind of anger, which is a kind of thing often jealous people are not very forgiving. But let's talk about sacrifice, and let me tell you about forgiveness in a different way than I've talked about it before. What we want to look at is the idea that forgiveness can be defined as an act of sacrifice for the health and well-being of your body, mind, and spirit. Might have an effect on someone else, but it's an act of sacrifice of what? It's a sacrifice of your egotism, if you need it. Now, what does that mean? What that means, what is this egotism? First of all, about forgiveness, you know when forgiveness has happened, because a lot of people are not so sure. How do I know when I've forgiven enough? Well, it's really simple. You've forgiven enough when you're not angry anymore. That's it. It's not the words you say. It's not the right thing that you do. It's not a ritual that you perform. When you don't feel angry, forgiveness has happened, however you bring it about. But the act itself is the sacrificing of egotism. I notice I'm carefully saying egotism here. Make sure you understand what we're talking about. Because if I said sacrifice of the ego, that causes an awful lot of misunderstanding. Because ego has so many positive meanings as well, your sense of self. And what we're talking about here is not getting rid of that, but getting rid of the sense of self-importance, the extreme sense of self-importance. And this is what egotism is. Because it's saying, in a sense, that your feelings are so important that anyone who does something you don't like deserves to be punished in the most terrible way possible. This is people who feel that they do not or cannot or will not forgive. It's all a problem of egotism, because they think their feelings are so important. That's the thing that has to be sacrificed to move forward and out of that state of unforgivingness, let's call it. You'll always focus most, this is for everybody, you will always focus most on whatever you believe is most important to you. That's natural, that's human. Everybody's behavior is like that. However, if your upset feelings are what are most important, you'll probably focus a lot on what somebody did that you don't like. And you'll keep activating it, keep feeding it. Keep it alive, and keep feeding your bad feelings. If your physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual well-being are more important, then you'll probably focus on some way to forgive, whether you use that term or not. But you'll find some way so that you're not angry anymore, because you know it's killing you. You know it's destroying your well-being. So you'll search for something. But it all depends on what you think is important. And that's what you're going to get the effects from. See, whatever happened in the past does not exist anymore. It exists in your memories, but not as an event. All the energy, all the atoms, all the things that we thought were very physical at the time don't exist anymore. Everything has changed. Not only has time changed, you got to remember this, space has changed. I have to remind people that the Earth is constantly moving, not just revolving, and not just going out around the sun, but the whole solar system is moving around the galaxy. That means the actual place where something happened that you didn't like is way, way, way back behind us someplace. And Earth isn't even there anymore. It doesn't exist. The only thing that exists that you still feel bad about are your memories. And they exist now, and they are as strong as you make them. Because you're the one that gives your memories importance. So you're the only one. And the more important you make certain memories, the greater the effect they have on you. And because they have that effect on you, they have an effect on people that you're connected with. So let's talk about forgiving now. We're going to look at this in terms of 3 steps, 3 things that you can do, and I'll give you some ideas on how you can do it, but 3 things. The first thing is to remove the anger. Now see, a lot of people think that forgiving is saying the words. That's not what we're talking about. Forgiving, see, I just forgave him.
That was quick.
Isn't that quick? Yeah, right. When you get really skilled at this stuff, okay, it really works well. Okay. But you have to find some way to get rid of the anger. Now, one of the there's lots of different things. One of the simple ones is reducing importance. The more important you make something that you don't like, the more you are likely to get angry and stay angry. So with some mental process of your own, if you can make it less important, to that degree, your anger about it will diminish. There are other kinds of things. There's a wonderful technique called EFT. There's another one called dynamite. These are techniques where you change the physical energy, mental state of your mind and body, and in a way that the anger disappears without any effort. They're really terrific. There's work that you can do with symbols, symbolizing the anger, and then changing the symbol. That's another way to do it. There's different meditations on beauty that just fill your body with harmony. And so there's no, it's not that you're suppressing the anger, it just disappears because you're in harmony now. So there are many, many possible techniques, but the first thing is to clear the anger to the best of your ability. Now, a curious thing, sometimes this other thing comes up first, but very often what happens when you start reducing the anger, or when you reduce it completely, what you have then, you have fear. Happens very often. This is really the main reason why people try to stay angry most of the time, and why they are afraid to forgive. Because there's this idea that if they forgive, one of 2 things might happen. One, in some mystical way, they will give power to the person who did something to them. Okay? And there's no power given, but there's this idea, there's this fear that if I forgive them, that gives them permission to do anything they want to me. Okay? That's one of the fears. The other fear then is is the one that something like this could happen again with somebody else if I don't stay angry. So it's the fear of not being able to deal with that kind of situation in the future. So these are usually the two kinds of things that the fear happens. Why people have such a resistance to forgiving is because they're afraid. So the next step is get rid of the fear. Lots and lots of techniques exist for doing that. There's ones that take a long time, ones that take a short time. Change the behavior of mind and body. I mentioned EFT, I mentioned Dynamite, those are really great. The other things, spiritual meditation is another one, symbol work. There's another technique called desensitization that is very, very useful. And desensitization means, let's say for instance you had somebody that you were still angry at, and you finally got to the point where you realize there's an underlying fear. Well, okay, first you try just thinking about the person's name. And then if that starts to get fearful, then you stop and you relax. You do something else. Then when you're ready, do it again. Until you can think of their name without having a fear reaction. Then you try to picture them. At a distance, maybe. And desensitize that reaction. Then maybe you try to think of them closer. Then next to you. Then speaking to them. Or hearing them speak. And you do this progressive desensitization. Doesn't have to take a long time, but you know, if there's a lot of fear, it might, and that's okay, because it doesn't cost anything. And gradually you'll be able to think of them in all kinds of ways without any fear. And that's usually when you no longer have the need for anger either. You don't need the anger to protect yourself if you're not afraid. Anyway, that's one technique. So, once you've gotten rid of the anger, once you've gotten rid of the fear, the next thing you want to get rid of is doubt. And the doubt is to remove any doubt about handling similar situations in the future. Now, it's one thing to fear something, but it's another thing to doubt whether you can do this or not. So we're talking about the doubt. And the whole thing here is, there's three things you might think of. And again, many techniques for doing this. But the more you build your self-esteem, the more you build your self-confidence, the more you learn appropriate skills, the more the doubt goes away. Because then you will start to feel competent, not only without anger, not only fearless, but competent for dealing with that kind of thing in other parts of your life. And you can use those as a kind of a three-step process using whatever techniques you can find. Get rid of fear, get rid of anger, get rid of fear, get rid of doubt. And you don't even have to use the word forgiveness. When you are no longer angry or fearful or doubtful about the situation, forgiveness has happened. Do you have any questions about that? How it might be applied, what kind of situations could come up? Yes.
I have a question with like a difficult relative who will repeatedly show up in your life, like around Christmas.
Yes.
You can apply this, I assume.
Sure. Okay, a difficult relative might show up time and time again. What do you do about that? Well, you know, there's an analogy that I use. If a wolf attacks you are not, and you forgive the wolf for attacking you, you're not obliged to hang around with wolves. Okay? You don't have to keep inviting them to your house. You don't have to keep going where they live. Right? That's just common sense. Right? So if you have succeeded in forgiving someone, that does not mean you have to open your door to them. It does not mean you have to have anything to do with them anymore. It does not mean you have to make them your friend. It does not mean that. Because you have no control over their behavior. a lot of times, when you forgive, the other person will forgive. And this is when you are dealing with somebody who's normally good-hearted, but all got caught up in some kind of conflict. Because most people will respond to your change of heart, your change of mind. Some won't, because they're using, some people use their ability to influence other people as a form of manipulation for their own purposes and for their own ends. Either because of something they want to achieve or some kind of power trip to prove how powerful they are, okay? And you can't control that. You forgive, most of the time the other person will respond, but you can't control it. So you have to take whatever steps are appropriate for you, like staying away from wolves, okay? All right. Yes.
How would you relate this to criticism, supposedly benevolent criticism?
Benevolent criticism doesn't exist. There is such a thing as benevolent critique. That's a skill. But even then, you can't control how the other person is going to react to it. But if you're talking about it directed toward yourself, so you're talking about someone else directing it toward you? Yeah, right. What do you do about that? Build self-confidence, build self-esteem. And one of the simplest techniques that's really helpful is that anytime you're criticized by anybody for anything, give yourself a compliment about something you believe is right and true and good about you, your behavior, your skills, anything about you. Okay. Giving yourself a compliment when you are criticized has an almost magical effect on reducing or eliminating the bad feeling you get from what seems to be rejection. Now, this is why I included the self-esteem and self-confidence. The higher your self-esteem, the less open you are to feelings of rejection. The more you can also practice connectedness with your environment, with the world, with the universe, and do that in such a way that you have no more doubt about it. It takes practice, but it's worthwhile. Then somebody does what would ordinarily be thought of as a criticism, and you're receiving it as information about that person's behavior, which is completely different. Because it can't possibly be about you, right? So that person's got a problem. Okay? I remember there was some years back, there was a man who became very famous, very well known. He wrote books about love, and he was an Italian guy, really great. What is it? The name again? Leo Buscaglia, that's right, good. And I got a hug from him too, he had a real good hug. But he just had this natural kind of way of thinking, you know. He said one time he was walking across the campus and this beautiful girl was walking along, and he said, "Hi," you know, with a big smile, and she just put her nose in the air and walked by, and he said, "That girl's got a problem." Okay? Never even entered his mind to take it personally. Okay? So it's that kind of connectedness feeling. Because he not only loved himself, he loved the world. And if somebody doesn't recognize love in the world, they've got a serious problem. So those are some of the things to think about that way. Anything else?
What if you're really trying to love the world and be connected with the environment and everything, and how would you relate the way to corporate?
Oh, I see.
The environment.
How if you're trying to love the world, love the environment, how would you relate to the corporate environment? Believe it or not.
Destroying it.
Well, careful. Let's have some clarity. It is easy, and human beings do this a lot. We have this human tendency to generalize. And it's extremely useful sometimes. For instance, here we talk about the forest. Right? There's no such thing as a forest. There's a bunch of trees and vines and flowers and dirt and lots of other stuff. We can't think about all that, it's too much. So we say forest. Okay, so when we look at some other things, and we say this because it's a generalization, some companies are destroying the environment. Not all of them, definitely. Okay? But some companies are destroying the environment. But even that's not true. What's true is some people working in these companies are doing things that result in environmental destruction. People are doing it. Companies don't do things. I know there's a legal fiction that says they are a legal body, an entity, but that's fiction. Okay? It's people. And it's not everybody in the company who will do that. Most probably, the clerk in the accounting department doesn't even know what's going on. Okay? So sometimes it's good to take a close look at that and realize sometimes generalizations it's not seeing the trees for the forest. And it's just so easy to talk about some huge thing. It's like there's no such thing as government. It's a word we use for a bunch of people who work for what we call the government. It's the individuals in that organization who do the things we like or do the things we don't like. Right? There's an awful lot of stuff going on, some of it good and some of it not good. But it's people who are doing it. It's really helpful to remember that. So then we don't get mad at the corporation or the government or these amorphous fictional entities. We don't have to get mad at anybody. We might if we don't know what to do. We get mad when we're helpless, when we feel helpless. So we got to get out of helplessness into doing something about it. If we try to do something about the company, you feel more helpless. Because it's amorphous, because it's not any particular thing that you can actually do something to except symbolically, and that's ridiculous. That's for your own ego. People who are burning down a company building or something like that, or all of that's pure egotism. It's what people do when they feel helpless. They try and attack a symbol. And it's got nothing to do with anything. So, get out of helplessness. And the way to get out of helplessness is in whatever way you can discover, and sometimes it takes a little research and effort. So any way that you can discover, either do what you can to undo it, do what you can to help whatever is being affected, do whatever you can to bring about change in whatever way is possible. Now, when you realize you're really working to undo what certain people have done, it's not as big a task as trying to change a whole thing. Okay? And that's just practical. In what we teach, in Huna, of course, some of you may or may not know this, but people who are really practicing Huna are never helpless, because we have 4 levels of kinds of ways that we can act in 4 different sort of kinds of realities that we accept as effective means of action. And so, just very simply, we can do what we can on a physical level. We can do what we can on a telepathic level. We can do a lot more there. We can do what we can on a dream level, because we accept that that's a valid area to work in. And we can do what we can, it's hard to describe it, but it's more of a spiritual level, more of a holistic level. This is going to sound kind of odd, but you become the problem and solve yourself. And very hard to put into words. But these are all valid ways of acting if you accept them. Okay? But even if you don't, there's always something that you can do, which is a movement. And when you're doing something, there are thousands, maybe millions of other people doing something. And so you're never alone when you see something that needs to be corrected. You're never alone. There are going to be lots of other people who want to correct it as well. And correcting it, in Hawaiian this is called pono. Correcting it is far more fruitful than just sitting back passively and being upset. Yes?
What about self-forgiveness?
Oh, that's a good one.
Forgiveness workshop one time where everybody decided, well, we're really most angry at ourselves.
Okay,
So
good.
guilt,
Sure, guilt is the same kind of thing. Guilt is a form of anger directed toward one's self. So, we do exactly the same thing. Why do people stay guilty? Because of egotism. Because what I did was so terrible that I don't deserve to be forgiven. They're just making what they did so important. And it's the most curious kind of thing. We're not talking about the simple realization that I did something and it wasn't good and I need to correct it. Okay, so there's a moment of guilt from the recognition that you need to do something about it. Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the ongoing guilt, which is a very subtle kind of power play. Because of, oh, see how important it was that I did, and I can't be forgiven for that. And of course, you can only be forgiven by yourself anyway. It doesn't matter what anybody else says or does. Until you accept that, you don't feel forgiven. But to refuse to feel forgiven is a power play. That's egotism. So if you want to forgive yourself, you just haven't known how, gave you the same 3 steps. Clear the anger about what you did. Clear the fear about the consequences of clearing the anger. Because, the fear that you might do it again kind of thing. Okay? Clear the fear. And then clear the doubt that you won't know what to do or be able to do anything in the future. By building your confidence, building your self-esteem, and learning skills. Same process.
Does that apply to shame as well?
Yeah, shame and guilt are very close. When they're ongoing, you only feel shame because you feel guilty. How about having done something wrong?
But it's more, isn't it, an identification that I am a bad person?
Yeah, right. It's like that's that subtle power play.
Okay.
I'm so bad. See, it's not just that I'm a bad person, because normally if you feel you're a bad person, you do something to become a good person. But to stay a bad person, oh, the shame, that's a power play. Pure ego. And that's what you have to sacrifice. The giving up of that power hit. And those 3 things that I suggested are the ways to do that. So you don't need that kind of game anymore. We need, as human beings, I mean deep down need, urge, fundamental, to feel connected and to feel effective. We usually translate those as love and power. We do all sorts of good things, interesting things, and wild and freaky things to get those feelings. Because those feelings, it doesn't matter, the external stuff doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling for everybody. And that's why the people engage in the behavior that they engage in. If you can find a healthier way to get the feeling, you don't need the unhealthy way. It's just as simple as that. But you got to satisfy those feelings.
I really really it rang true when you were talking about building self-esteem and releasing the anger, but having the self-esteem and the, you know, compassion to take a look at the situation if it needs forgiveness
Sure,
and move forward positively.
exactly, that's compassion. So compassion is when you not only are aware of something that needs changing, you do something about it. Compassion is not a passive thing. That's sympathy. Compassion is when you act in some fashion, at some level. So compassion toward yourself applies as much as compassion toward anyone or anything.
I came up with a new acronym, CC.
What? CC?
CC.
Yes.
CECE. It's compassion, encouragement, no, it's consideration, encouragement, compassion, and empathy. Came up with that one.
Consideration, encouragement, compassion, and energy. CC.
Empathy.
Empathy. Okay. All right. That's very good. As long as that helps. That's right. Good. Thank you.